What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. Last night the Los Angeles Lakers were defeated by the Portland Trailblazers by the final score of 106 to 101, and that dropped them to 37 and 30 on the year. They are the seventh seed. Portland has now moved up ahead of them into the sixth seed. AD did get, he was rather dominant last night with 36 points and 12 rebounds. However, Dame Lillard more than matched his output with 38 points, and Dame Lillard has had more help, from his teammates. And look, I'm noticing, and shout out to Ticket TV. Shout out to Ticket TV, man. He did an excellent live stream this morning, man, talking about how the Lakers are in peril. But it's like if you watch ESPN, if you watch most of these sports programs, they're making excuses for them. They're pretty much, you know, having a nonchalant attitude about what's going on. Okay. Um, this is the thing, including a lot of Laker fans. Not all of them, but a lot of Laker fans are delusional right now. They think that the Lakers could just turn it on. After you saw what happened last year with the Clippers, unbelievable. Last year you saw what the Clippers did. We were the ones who had egg on our face, thinking the Clippers could turn on. And the Clippers were not in the position that the Lakers are in right now. That was more of a matter of chemistry. Not only do you have a lack of chemistry with this team, you have age issues and injury issues. And honestly, I don't think that they're as motivated this year. But let me get some historical facts out of the way. This team is in danger of becoming really the first defending champion team to not make the playoffs. Now, technically, that's not true. Okay, there's two other teams. The 1999 Chicago Bulls is one of them, but that has an asterisk by it because, as we all know, Phil Jackson was gone. He retired for a year. Michael Jordan was retired. Scottie Pippen was traded, and Dennis Rodman briefly retired and then signed, a short contract with the Lakers. But they were gone. So their starting five, save for Ron Harper, was gone. Some other pieces were gone too. So that wasn't the same team. They went from 62 and 20 to, I believe, 15 and 67. Well, I think the worst team in Bulls history. But it wasn't the same actual team. The other team is the 1970 Boston Celtics. But it was another situation that's similar. Okay? Bill Russell retired. Sam Jones retired. And their head coach, who was Bill Russell, retired. Back then, players could be head coaches before the NBA changed that rule. I think I know why they did that. So it wasn't really the same team. When you have the actual team together, like the actual team that played the next year and didn't really lose any major pieces, the worst that a defending champion has ever done is the 2007 Miami Heat. You remember that team lost in the first round to the Chicago Bulls. They got swept 4-0. Another team that did very poorly and was shocking was the 1984 Philadelphia 76ers. The year before that, they went 65 and 17, and they only lost one playoff game. Back when it was 3 rounds in the playoffs, they only lost one playoff game to the Milwaukee Bucks, who were a really good team at that time. Shockingly, in the first round in '84, they lost to the then New Jersey Nets, which was a huge upset. I can't remember the spread, but I think it was 4 games to 2 or something like that. Well, excuse me, 3 games to 2 or 3 games to 1 or something like that. But this would be unprecedented if this Lakers team did not make the playoffs. Now, I'm realistic. I know the NBA is going to try to do everything they can to make sure the Lakers are in the playoffs, but the league can only do so much to help a team. Okay. Um, Another thing I want to address. I notice now because of the reality of the situation, after ESPN and all these other sports networks have been telling you not to worry, it's just a little snag and all this. Now, because they see what's going on, they're telling you, well, the Lakers might make history. They might become the lowest seeded team ever to win a championship. It's like they're not seeing what's going on here. It's like they're not seeing things for what it is. It's like someone who's in denial about their relationship. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't you see what the fuck's going on? First of all, the lowest seeded team ever to win a championship is 1995 Houston Rockets, right? And the second lowest seed, the 1969 Boston Celtics. But let's make some distinctions here. The 1995 Rockets, who were the sixth seed, finished 46 and 36. However, at one point in that season, if I'm not mistaken, they were under 500. So they were actually playing a lot better going toward the playoffs than they were earlier in the season. They were playing their best basketball going into the playoffs. Their chemistry, everything was solidifying as they were going into the playoffs. They weren't your typical six seed. Earlier in the season, they were playing very poorly. Very poorly. If I'm not mistaken, there was a game that year where they got blown out by the Knicks because the Knicks were very motivated by the loss in the finals. And John Stocks dropped 40 points on them. And I think it was a blowout. And I think they did it at Houston. You know what I'm saying? Like earlier in the season, they were not a really good team. They didn't like a championship team. That wasn't the case toward the end of the season. But despite that, okay, they had to do a Herculean task of beating the Utah Jazz, who were a championship level team at that time, a team that could realistically win the title. They beat them in the first round. Then the next round, they beat a team that many people favored to win the title that year, the Phoenix Suns, who actually were up 3-1. And Houston had to come back from deficits of 20 points, I think twice against Phoenix. So it took a Mario Ellie three-pointer to eke out a victory against that team. Then in the Western Conference Finals, they had to beat the MVP and David Robinson and the team with the best record in the NBA, the Spurs, with 62 wins. Then they had to beat the most dangerous team in the NBA because they were unbeatable at home, 39-2 at the O Arena, the 95 Orlando Magic, who on paper should have won the finals. And you remember in the first game, they were up 20 against Houston. So it took a little luck. And they had to overcome so much to get that championship. That's why it's considered the most impressive playoff run ever. And then when you go to the 1969 Boston Celtics, yes, that was the Celtic dynasty. Yes. And we often talk about how they were a super team. But the last two championships, I do give Bill Russell and company much more credit, especially the last one. Now, in 68, they benefited because they overcame a 3-1 deficit against the defending champion Sixers, who knocked them out in 67. But people forget that that Sixers team had lost two key players in that series, and that's why Boston was able to overcome that 3-1 deficit. In 1969, Boston looked old. The average age of their starters was 32, and we're talking back in 1969 here. And the only one that was in his prime was Havlicek, who was 29 years old. Everybody else was in their mid 30s. Bill Russell and Sam Jones had been the cornerstone of that franchise. Were in their mid 30s and they started looking old. Um, they also had to deal with a lot of injuries. At 48 and 34, they were not the same team. Also, this was when a lot of other teams were starting to come of age, okay, in the NBA. The Bullets organization had the sensational Wes Unseld, who was not only the Rookie of the Year, but the league MVP that year. I think they won like 57 games that year. Then you had the New York Knicks, who made that trade for Dave DeBusschere that season. And when they made the trade for Dave DeBusschere, they were 18 and 17. They finished 54 and 28. This was that Knick team that eventually would go on to win 2 titles. Um, you know, so you had other teams that were starting to come. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had just turned around the Milwaukee Bucks organization from 28 wins to 56 wins. So you get my picture. This was an NBA landscape that was changing. But Boston was able to overcome the Sixers in the first round. In the next round, because I think it was only 3 rounds back then, in the next round, I believe they beat the New York Knicks, who next year won the title. And in the NBA Finals, they overcame a 2-0 deficit against the Lakers. And they still had to benefit from a feud between the head coach and Wilt because Wilt got injured in Game 7. See, when you just look back at records, you gotta know what you're talking about. You know what I'm saying? So even with that Bill Russell team, they had some luck on their side. But both of those teams that I'm mentioning, the 69 Celtics and the 95 Rockets, were playing better basketball going into the playoffs. The Lakers are not. The Lakers are playing their worst basketball. And yes, there's theoretically some time for them to get better. But no, you don't want to play Russian roulette right now when it comes to the playing tournament. The aura of invulnerability, I guess, that many championship teams have is gone with the Lakers. No one's scared of them. And plus, I think there's another thing. I have to be realistic, okay? Um, and LeBron fans, you can call what you want to, it's the truth. A lot of players are resentful and envious of the attention that LeBron James and Lakers get. And that's extra motivation to beat that team, okay? It's just nature, you know what I'm saying? Um, that comes with the territory. Karl Malone talked about how he was tired of teams always paying attention to the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. Quote, it's the same damn thing every year. I get sick of it. I remember all this shit these guys used to say. People were tired of, there were some competitors that were tired of the attention that Kobe and Shaq got, and later on Kobe and Gasol got. It's just natural. You know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, that's part of it as well. But I'll just end the video on this. The Lakers are not comparable to the 95 Rockets right now or the 69 Lakers. Okay? If anything, I would compare them more to the 2007 Miami Heat, who clearly were not the same team the next year. Lost in the first round in an embarrassing sweep to the Chicago Bulls. And the very next year, they finished 15 and 67 because they pretty much blew the team up. So, the Lakers don't want to go. The Lakers don't want to have. The Lakers don't want that to happen to them. Also, to me, if that were to happen, you can blame injuries, you can blame everything in the world. But it's going to be a hit to LeBron's legacy and the GOAT argument if the Lakers were to fall in a historic fashion in that way. So the Lakers have to turn things around. They gotta be serious and not be nonchalant because that will get their ass eliminated.